FAR.F4.M6.
So, Jenna, this module has one of those accounting names that sounds terrifying. Troubled debt restructuring and extinguishment. It sounds like something from a disaster movie.
It really does. But once you understand why these transactions happen, everything else falls into place. This entire module is about one question. What happens when a borrower cannot realistically pay back a debt under the original terms?
So, this isn't just someone deciding they want a better interest rate.
Exactly. A troubled debt restructuring occurs when a creditor grants concessions to a debtor because the debtor is experiencing financial difficulty. That's the key idea. The concession isn't just a business negotiation. It's driven by the debtor's financial problems.
I think that's the first mental checkpoint. Before you start thinking about journal entries, ask yourself, why is this deal changing? If the answer is because the borrower is in trouble and the lender is making concessions, then you're in this chapter.
Exactly. Everything else grows from that starting point.
And I noticed something else while reading the module. There are really only a handful of ways this restructuring can happen.
Right. The debtor may transfer an asset, the debtor may transfer equity, the parties may modify the debt's terms, or the restructuring may involve a combination of those methods. Keeping those categories separate makes the chapter much easier.
It's almost like settling a debt with a friend. Maybe I pay you cash, maybe I give you my bicycle instead. Maybe you simply agree that I can pay you later, or maybe we combine those ideas.
That's actually a useful analogy. Just remember that accounting adds one more layer. We aren't only interested in what changed hands. We're interested in whether the old debt still exists afterward. That's one of the biggest distinctions in this module.
And that's where the first pass key comes in.
Exactly. If the debtor transfers assets or equity interests, once that transfer takes place, the debt has been extinguished. Think about that word, extinguished. The old obligation is gone.
So if I hand over my car to settle my loan, we're done. The debt disappears.
Correct. But if we simply renegotiate the payment schedule, that's different.
The debt is still alive. It's just wearing different clothes.
Exactly. Under a modification of terms, the debt has not been extinguished. Only the contractual terms have changed.
I like thinking about it as replacing a relationship versus updating a relationship. Transfer assets or stock, relationship ends. Modify payment terms, relationship continues.
That's a good way to remember it. Now let's talk about asset transfers, because students often miss something important.
I think I know what's coming. There are actually two different things happening.
Exactly. Suppose a company transfers land to settle debt. Before the debt even enters the picture, accounting asks a completely separate question. What is the land worth today? If the land's fair value differs from its carrying amount, the company recognizes a gain or loss on the asset itself. Only after that does the restructuring get evaluated.
That's sneaky. Students naturally think they're calculating one gain, but they're really checking two different events. First, did the asset change in value? Second, did settling the debt create another gain?
Exactly. Those are two independent ideas.
Here's an analogy. Imagine I'm trading in my old car to pay off a loan. One question is whether my car is worth more or less than what's sitting on my books. A completely different question is whether the lender accepted something worth less than what I owed. Those aren't the same calculation.
Perfect. And keeping those questions separate prevents one of the easiest mistakes students make.
Now, what about transferring stock instead of property?
Conceptually, it's similar. Instead of handing over an asset, the debtor issues equity to settle the obligation. The debt is extinguished because ownership interests were transferred in settlement. The gain on restructuring is based on the carrying amount of the payable compared with the fair value of the equity issued.
So even though the thing being transferred changed, the big picture didn't. Transfer something valuable. Debt disappears. Measure the gain appropriately. Move on.
Exactly. The category changed. The accounting objective didn't.
Now, let's move to what I think is the trickiest part. Modification of terms, because nothing actually gets handed over.
That's where students have to slow down. The debt remains outstanding. The debtor usually accounts for the modification prospectively. But there's an important exception.
I knew there would be an exception. Accounting always has one.
The carrying amount matters. Compare the carrying amount with the total future cash payments required under the modified agreement. If the carrying amount exceeds those future payments, then a gain is recognized. Otherwise, no gain is recognized immediately. Instead, The carrying amount continues under the modified terms.
That feels backward at first. Why compare to total future payments instead of present value?
Because that's the rule for the debtor in this situation. If you try to substitute another measurement approach, you'll confuse yourself.
That's probably worth repeating. When you're studying, don't fight the rule. Learn the rule first, then worry about why it exists later.
Exactly. And here's another subtle point. Sometimes future payments aren't perfectly known. If payments depend on future events, the debtor estimates future payments as necessary to avoid recognizing an inappropriate gain.
So, uncertainty doesn't mean we give up. It means we estimate carefully.
Right, now let's switch perspectives. Everything we've discussed so far has mostly been from the debtor's point of view.
And accounting loves changing perspectives.
The creditor thinks differently. The creditor isn't celebrating a restructuring gain. Instead, the creditor is asking whether the loan has become impaired.
That makes sense. The lender isn't saying, "Great, my customer couldn't pay." They're thinking, "How much of my money am I actually going to recover?"
Exactly. The creditor evaluates impairment and may recognize bad debt expense with a corresponding allowance for credit losses. That's the focus. Expected collection, not restructuring gains.
I think that's one of the biggest mental shifts in the chapter. Same transaction, different accounting objectives.
That's exactly right. The debtor asks, "What happened to my obligation?" The creditor asks, "How much of my receivable is still recoverable?"
It's like watching the same football game from opposite sidelines. Everyone's seeing the same plays. They're just cheering for different outcomes.
That's actually a great analogy. The facts are identical. The accounting perspective changes.
Now the last section is debt extinguishment. How is that different from troubled debt restructuring?
Debt extinguishment is broader. Debt can be retired before maturity. Callable bonds may be redeemed before their stated maturity. Refundable bonds may be retired and replaced with new debt carrying a lower interest rate. The important accounting principle is that a liability cannot be removed from the books until it has been extinguished. If the debtor pays it or is legally released, the liability comes off the books.
So extinguishment isn't automatically about financial distress. It's simply about ending the obligation.
Exactly. Troubled debt restructuring is one path that may extinguish debt, but extinguishment itself is a broader accounting concept.
I think that's another place students accidentally combine topics. They hear the word extinguishment and immediately think financial trouble. Not necessarily.
Exactly. Always ask why the debt disappeared. That tells you which accounting guidance you're using.
Before we wrap up, let's build one big mental map. Suppose I open an exam question. What's the first thing I should ask?
Ask whether the debtor is experiencing financial difficulty and whether the creditor granted a concession. If not, you're probably not dealing with a troubled debt restructuring.
Next,
Ask how the restructuring happened. Asset transfer, equity transfer, modification of terms, combination. That tells you which accounting model applies.
then ask whether the original debt still exists.
Exactly. Transfers generally extinguish the debt. Modified terms generally do not. That distinction is one of the biggest ideas in the entire module.
Then remember that assets have their own accounting before they settle debt. Don't combine those steps.
Right. Separate asset measurement from restructuring accounting. They're related, but they're not identical.
Then switch viewpoints. The debtor focuses on obligations and possible gains. The creditor focuses on collectability and impairment.
Exactly. That's the entire mental framework. If you remember those relationships, the examples become much easier because you'll already know why each journal entry exists instead of trying to memorize every debit and credit.
And that's really the goal for the CPA exam. Not memorizing dozens of journal entries. Building a map of the chapter so every rule has a logical place.
Exactly. Once you understand why the accounting changes depending on whether the debt disappears, continues, or is viewed by the debtor versus the creditor, you've captured the heart of FAR.F4.M6.